Member Crowfoot has 10 minutes.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. And just to note that I will be splitting my time with my friend and colleague from Langley Aldergrove. Mr. Speaker, it is the responsibility of parliamentarians to, in certain circumstances, make decisions that have to do with life or death. And that is where we find ourselves today. Now, in the context of most of parliamentary history, and I know not only here in Canada, but other parliaments around the world, it has to do with times of war and conflict. But today it's unique when we discuss the context of determining the status of what has been come to be referred to as medical assistance in dying. An incredibly delicate issue that has brought forward a huge range of emotions and opinions from across the country, from across the political spectrum, and certainly is something that requires thoughtfulness when being addressed. But Mr. Speaker, I do want to very specifically address something that has been very concerning to me in this discussion. And I'll get to the substance of C-62 here in a moment. But it has been brought forward and demanded by other political parties in this place that one's faith and the values on which they build their moral system should not be included in this discussion. That somehow as parliamentarians we should separate those things from the discussion. And Mr. Speaker, I would assert to you today on behalf of many of my constituents who have reached out to me on this matter, many of whom agree with me, some of whom don't. But the basis of our moral system, whether that be myself as a Christian, whether that be other people of faith, whether that be Muslim, Jewish, otherwise, or no faith at all, whether it be the experience that one lives, that all plays a role in us as parliamentarians and us as a society being able to make decisions. So, Mr. Speaker, my message to you, to this House, and to all Canadians watching is that we should never try to remove one's faith from the conversations, one value system from the conversation, but rather it should be a part of it. Thoughtfully, of course, but it should be a part of it. And that certainly is the case when we are discussing something as important as medical assistance in dying. So let's take a step back. What does Bill C-62 mean? It is a delay on the bringing into force an aspect of the medical assistance in dying regime that has been, and all parties actually, at different points in time, although that's certainly not the status of this debate today, but at different points in time have said there is tremendous concern about the widespread expansion of a system that could put Canada's most vulnerable at risk. And certainly that's something that should force all of us to take pause. Now, it has been asserted very, very clearly by myself and many of my colleagues that this has gone simply too far when the regime that we're talking about is truly putting Canada's most vulnerable at risk. But the specifics of this bill today is a needed pause. And my assertion would be so that we, when I voted in favor of my colleague from Abbotsford's bill that would remove the provisions of medical assistance in dying that could lead very well, and we hear examples of it, Mr. Speaker. This is not simply an allegation. We hear very clear examples of that, and I'll get into some local examples here in a moment. But we have to ensure that we protect those most vulnerable. So a pause, and that's why I will be supporting putting a pause on this expansion of MAID. But Mr. Speaker, I believe that we need to go much further than that. And I'll get into a few of those reasons here in a moment. But I would, Mr. Speaker, it was brought to my attention, and as a Christian, taking seriously God's Word, the Bible, and I would reference a Bible verse in my debate here today. And it is 1 Peter chapter 4, verses 10. It says this: "As each has received a gift, use it to serve one another as good stewards of God's grace." And the reason why I bring that forward today is because I think it provides important context for something that is truly foundational in how we look at the world, and that is the idea of life the value and dignity of life and one's life. I heard recently from a constituent who shared a heartbreaking story. A woman shared that her son was in a mental health hospital. He was found inches away from taking his own life. He did reach out at the last moment, asking his parents for help and expressing that while it was incredibly complex, the different things he was facing, he did not want to die. And as a result, the family was able to advocate for him and to work very diligently to help bring a care to help support this young man and to ensure that he could get the help that was required. The slippery slope, and we were told in the beginning that there was no such thing as a slippery slope. But we have seen over the last 8 years, since the Liberals first brought forward, when Jody Wilson-Raybould was Minister of Justice and Attorney General, there was warnings at committee, there was warnings in the various court decisions that led us to this point, that we had to be very, very aware of the slippery slope. And we are seeing that here today, Mr. Speaker. And what I find very, very tragic is that whether it is the story that I referenced from a constituent where I won't get into the specifics to ensure that their identity is protected, you hear this tragic, tragic story where at least intervention was possible. Yet this constituent reached out and said, had there been mechanisms in place that would have even suggested that it was possible, they feared the outcome, what the outcome would have been, and that they would have lost their son. We hear also the numerous examples of where addiction, stealing the life away from individuals. Yet instead of ensuring that there is hope and opportunity, there would be that they're not given that dignity to get better. So, Mr. Speaker, the potential of getting better is so very important in this discussion. And I compliment my colleague from Caribou Prince George and the 988 number. And in fact, it was a tragic irony that it took longer for the government to set up the 988 suicide helpline than it did for them to bring forward what was the first one-year extension in the expansion of the medical assistance in dying regime. We have before us a delay. But Mr. Speaker, when it comes to the very heart of the matter, we need to stand up for the life and dignity of all Canadians. I would submit to you, and I understand how we need to be thoughtful in how we engage in the subject, because it is deeply personal and everybody can point to different stories. But to protect life, to offer life, to not lose hope, and to ensure that death does not become a part of healthcare. We heard tragic examples of where, whether it's veterans being offered medical assistance in dying instead of mental health support, where Canadians who are hungry, instead of having to battle through difficult times economically, that they start pursuing some of these things. And we've heard, and I referenced a number of times the committee. I tell you, Mr. Speaker, and to those who might be watching, listening to some of the stories of those who shared very honestly about how their lives would have been put at risk had there been mechanisms that did not have safeguards, that did not prioritize the need for life and to offer that hope. So, Mr. Speaker, I started my speech by talking about how, as parliamentarians, sometimes we're tasked with making decisions that are literally life and death, and this is one. And my submission to you and to this place, and I would urge all members, that we need to ensure that we always prioritize life. Because if we fail in that duty, I shudder to think what the long-term implications of that would be for our society, and how absolutely devastating that would be for lives that could be lost through a regime does not prioritize dignity and ensure that whether that's with mental health, whether that's with disability, or whether that's others who are facing vulnerable, whether it's moments or longer stages of their life, Mr. Speaker, let's make sure that Canadians are given every opportunity to choose life and that it's the government not facilitating death.
Question commentaire, questions and comments. L'honorable député de Montcalm.
The honourable member for Montcalm. Mr. Speaker, I am glad that my colleague's tone was quite calm and thoughtful. I'm happy to reflect on what he said, but when I listen to him, it sounds like all mental illnesses are reversible and curable. But all experts, whether for or against these measures, they may agree that it's difficult to bring in these irredeemability provisions, but they agree that people may suffer for decades. I agree with him. We need to be careful, kind, and we need to give importance to the quality of life and to life. What is his proposed solution?
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. And certainly there is a wide range of what could be considered mental illness or psychological disorders or neurological disorders that in some cases are, in fact, terminal. But, Mr. Speaker, I think part of the reason why we need to be so very, very careful and why I am concerned about the direction that this government has pursued, but also some of the other conversations that have taken place in relation to this, is that we are not ensuring that we are prioritizing the ability and the hope that there is, in so many circumstances, Mr. Speaker, that opportunity to get better and provide a dignified quality of life that would allow people to truly live their best life no matter what circumstance. Prioritizing life as opposed to a circumstance where those who could get better are not given that opportunity.
Questions and comments. Question commentaire. The honourable member for Esquimalt, Saanich-Sud.
Thank you very much, Speaker, and I very much appreciated my colleague's comments. I wonder, since it's very clear that there's a class and racial and a geographic aspect to being able to access mental health services. So we have a problem for rural and remote communities, we have a problem in Indigenous communities, and we have a problem for those who can't pay for their services. So as a way of also attacking this problem, would the member support making mental health services fully a part of the Canada Healthcare Plan?
Honourable member for Battle River Crowfoot.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. And as a rural member of Parliament, I have long fought for and will continue to fight for ensuring that rural Canada, whether that's East Central Alberta, where I am proud to represent, or across rural and remote across Canada and in our north, have access to both the mental health services that they need. And Mr. Speaker, I have long since, from my early days in the nomination to become the Conservative candidate prior to the 2019 election to since, I've long said that mental health is, in fact, health. And we need to ensure, and that's why I was so proud to stand in support of and continue to call for the 988 suicide helpline. That's why in the last election I was proud to support a platform that had significant mental health investments. And Mr. Speaker, I believe that the idea that mental health is that basis of ensuring that every Canadian has dignity and every opportunity to succeed and the chance to get better. Because, Mr. Speaker, we cannot forget that there is always hope.
Commentaire, questions and comments. The honourable member for Cariboo Prince George.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I thank my honourable colleague for his intervention and indeed the shout out that he gave. I will remind the House that it was not just myself that did this, it was a team effort. We all chipped in to get bring 988 to Canada. Mr. Speaker, what was interesting throughout our committee work on MAID is that we found that countries that offer psychiatric medical assistance in dying, those countries that it was almost a 2-to-1 ratio that women select or try to get or apply for MAID more than men. So there are more women that are seeking MAID than men, and that is indeed troubling. And I would offer through you, Mr. Speaker, I wonder if our colleague shares the same, but I also would ask that should we not be looking at a national strategy for suicide prevention rather than going down this road of offering medical assistance in death, medical assistance in suicide, rather than we should be doing everything in our possible that is possible to help those, rather than to help those end their life.
In the best 30 seconds possible, the honourable member for Bell River Crowfoot.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. And there's a lot to unpack there. I appreciate that question. And certainly it speaks to how, in so many circumstances, whether it be women or whether it be people of color, whether it be those who are in a lower socioeconomic bracket, those are often the ones that end up being, in some cases, encouraged to pursue things like medical assistance in dying, when, Mr. Speaker, there needs to be dignity given to the value of their lives just as much as any other Canadian. And I find it so troubling that we seem to not be acknowledging those facts, and that we are putting the most vulnerable in our country at risk of the most final decision that could possibly imagined, and that is death. Mr. Speaker, we need to always prioritize life and treatment above that of death. Thank you.